Hi, everybody. Welcome to a special episode of the Perform Happy podcast. My guest today is an Olympian, which every little kid who goes through gymnastics at age 7 and goes, "I want to go to the Olympics," wants to be in the shoes of this particular individual. He's got a great story, and I'm really excited to have you here today, Sam Oldham. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, I remember hearing your story, and at 7 years old, you couldn't be contained, which I think is the story of every, little gymnast who's meant to be swinging on bars and jumping around. So, at what point did you know that you were going to the Olympics?
Oh, that's a big question. No one's really asked me that question before. I would say I remember a real clear moment in 2005 when I was 12 years old. And I remember it vividly running around a field at 6 o'clock in the morning in December when it was freezing cold, and thinking, right, I've got 7 years to go until the Olympic Games. I'm going to be on that plane ticket or that team for the Olympic Games. I'm going to do everything I possibly can to make sure that I'm there. But the honest answer to that is that although that was a dream of mine, it didn't really hit home until I had that phone call and the head national coach at the time said the words, "You've been selected to represent Great Britain at the Olympic Games." And then at that moment, it hit me that this thing I'd been building up for since I was a child and since I'd watched the Olympic Games in 2004 in Athens on TV for the very first time, had become a reality. And even at that point, it didn't really hit home for me until we arrived into the Olympic Village. And when you get into an Olympic Village, you get your accreditation. That's like your passport. It's basically a lanyard that you would wear to get you to the training arena, the food hall, the competition arena. You can't lose that. And we arrived, got off the bus, we're just in the line to get this, and the guy behind me was Michael Phelps. And I went, "Oh, this is it. I'm at the Olympic Games." And it hit me just then at that moment because he's obviously huge and I'm a gymnast. And the great thing about the Olympic Games is you get all different types of people. So you can spot the gymnast straight away because they're the smallest, but you can spot the volleyball players or the shot putters. So it's really cool.
Yeah, man. Okay, and up to this point, did that Olympic dream feel like something that motivated you, something that was pressure? Was this something that you had to do? Who was it for? I'm just curious, you've got this dream. Was it something that pushed you in a positive way? Do you think it pushed you in any negative ways? I'd love to know your relationship with that dream and what it did for you.
Sure, that's a really interesting question, and I think for me, in many ways, I had a conversation with my old team captain very recently, and he said something to me when I was at the age of about 26, and I was having a bit of a existential crisis, and he said to me, "Sam, I never expected anything in my career, so anything I achieved was always a bonus." And for me, I took the complete opposite lens to that. So for me, I expected to go to the Olympics. And that's what I measured my whole value in life from. So, in many ways, I set myself up to fail because the amount of kids that get to go to an Olympic Games, and for me, it wasn't just to go to an Olympic Games, I wanted to be the Olympic champion, and that was it. That's all I ever cared about as a kid. When I was a child, I would scour the internet for old VHS tapes of the Olympic Games, and I'd buy them from China and watch the 1992 Olympic Games or the 96 or 88 Olympic Games on these VHS tapes and just study the sport. So I was always someone that was very extreme, and I had decided that I'm going to be an Olympic medalist. And the interesting thing about that is that in many ways it was an impossible dream because at the time when I started to develop this idea that no matter what anybody says, I am going to go to the Olympic Games and I'm going to win a gold medal. The Great Britain team at that point was ranked the 23rd best team in the world. We had no athletes at the Olympic Games. So it was quite a crazy thing to decide that that's what I was going to do. But I was so headstrong at that age and I was incredibly determined as well. So I was one of those kids that you could leave me in the gym without a coach and never worry that I wouldn't do my work. I would do more work because I knew that the coach wasn't watching me and I didn't want them to think that I hadn't done the work. So I'd do even more work. So that's the type of mentality that I had. But I do think that in many ways, that became rather than me working towards something that was a very positive goal, it became became quite dark in that all of my identity was tied into this and whether or not I was going to achieve it or not. And rather than almost playing to win, I was playing not to lose. And I don't think that's a very good place to approach anything in life from, but especially sport, because at that point I'm trying not to make a mistake rather than going out to do my very best. And so I think for me, in my particular circumstances, it was too much too soon and I just couldn't handle it. And I am the type of character that is very extreme. So I'm trying to think of an equivalent in America. We have a lot in the UK in terms of athletes that there's a very famous footballer that's English called Paul Gascoigne, and he was one of the most talented players ever. But he had it within him to have two sides of the coin. He could be incredible, but he could also completely lose his way. And he lost his way, turned after football to gambling and drinking and drugs and all of that. And that was within me because I'm a very extreme person. I was never able to take the emotion out of gymnastics. And I didn't understand that I was an emotional kid. No one explained that to me. So for me, my reactions were always explosive. I wasn't able to use my brain. And for me, gymnastics is essentially doing very quick mental maths with your body. And so if you're trying to do very quick mental maths with your body under extreme pressure and you're just reacting off emotion, that isn't going to go very well. So yeah, I would, it's a really interesting question. And I would say certainly the initial spark was just the wonder of the Olympic Games and the dream and seeing it on TV. And, you know, I saw a gymnast come off the rings and he had the Olympic rings tattoo on the back of his neck. And I was sat on the sofa like this and I turned around and went, Dad, what's that? And my dad was on the sofa and he explained to me, look, if you go to the Olympic Games, it's a very special thing. Not many athletes ever get to go. And sometimes the athletes will get the Olympic rings tattooed on them to remind themselves of that dream they had when they was a kid. And I kind of sat and thought about it. And I was like, right, I want to do that. That sounds amazing. So the initial spark was a positive one. But then I think as the pressure built, it almost, yeah, it became quite a negative motivation rather than it being coming from a place of wonder and excitement and me exploring what was possible. It was, yeah, it was a lot of pressure. And I carried that weight and that pressure on my shoulders everywhere I went. And people would tell me that. I had coaches, parents, teammates. They'd say, you look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. And I wouldn't say anything. And in my head, I'm going, yeah, I am. It's really heavy, you know? But again, it was a different time. We're talking now 12 years ago, nobody really spoke about mental health or anything like that back then. So for me at 19 to come out and explain to people, hey, I'm really struggling with this amazing opportunity I've been given was just something that would never have happened.
Now, I wonder if you could go back with this 12 years of experience knowing mental health and what's important and coming through the other side, would you have approached it any differently if you had this forethought? Would you have changed your mindset? Would you have related to that dream any differently?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that. And I think I've interviewed a lot of former gymnasts and former athletes on my podcast in the last year. And nearly every single one of them, whenever you ask that question, they all come back to saying, okay, there were parts and elements of it that I would do differently, but I wouldn't change it. And I think if you're going to give the answer, I wouldn't change it, then you have to accept that some elements and parts of that mean that it was positive. And one thing I've learned to do now, being a little bit more detached from my career, is acknowledge the elements and the things that happened to me and the situations and conversations and the way I was treated in certain situations and go, yeah, they weren't okay, and it's important to highlight them and talk about them. But there was so much positive over here. I can't lose sight of that and forget that, because that's made me who I am right now. However, saying that, I think you could have had the success I had by going at it in a different direction. And I think at the time, as much as I was really young and couldn't handle it, I don't think the people around me were able to handle it because I've started to understand right now that, there's been a lot of stuff with the Me Too movement in Great Britain as well on the gymnastics side. And some things really, it's a very clear right and wrong. That's not okay. but there's a lot of nuance to everything, which is quite hard for me because I'm a very black and white person. But I'm starting to understand now that 12 years ago, that's always already a big chunk of time. It was a different time. And 12 years before that, it was a very different time. Society was different. Culturally, everything was different. And so I think at the time, I'm not sure there's much that anybody else could do. I can remember after London 2012, actually having quite a lot of frustration that my older teammates never stopped to ask me if I was okay. And I was like, if I was in your position, I would have asked if I was okay and maybe given me a hug and said, "Are you all right, mate? Like, are you okay? Are you able to handle this?" For people that don't know, in London 2012, I fell from the high bar in the team final. And so I came this close from costing my country a medal for the first time in 100 years. And I'm thinking, oh no, I've just cost Great Britain a medal, the first medal in 100 years, and that is all going to be on me. But 4 years later, at the age of 23, when I'm preparing for my second Olympic Games, I then went, oh my God, I'm 23. And those guys were 23 when that happened. I understand now why they didn't stop to ask me, because I'm still struggling with everything that I'm going through, 23 is still so young. Your brain doesn't fully form until you're 25. So to be able to handle all of these things, it's just very difficult. And I think nobody would have been able to help me at that point. And I'm not sure that, to be honest, you would have been able to change my mind. There were plenty of people throughout my career that said, Sam, look, you need to, don't take it so seriously. Like, maybe let's try and smile more and enjoy the experience. And I just wasn't that kid, man. It wasn't me. I was very intense, and I had to learn the hard way. You could have told me till you were blue in the face, come on, Sam, there's a different way you can approach this. I just wouldn't have listened until I learned it myself. So yeah, it's a difficult question to ask, but a very interesting one.
Yeah, and I think that just speaks to being a teenager.
Mm,
Anyone who's telling any 19-year-old anything is going to be wrong. I think of myself at 19, I was so smart. I knew everything. I had everything I needed and I did not want help. I
mm,
mean, that was like, I don't know about you, but that was me at 19. So someone was to say, calm down, Rebecca. It's not that big of a deal. Zoom out, see the big picture. I would be like, you don't understand. Uh, Thanks anyway, but you don't understand.
yeah,
So I think a lot of parents will go, kids, here are some ideas that might work better than what you're doing. And they're like, Mom, you don't understand. And then they get to age 23, 25, and they go, oh, or they have their own kids and go, oh, okay. But we ultimately have to learn it ourselves. So I'd love to know a little bit about how your parents played a role in your success. You know,
yeah.
what did
So
they do right? What did they do wrong? We don't have to call them out too badly, but just for the parents listening, what are some things that they can do that helped you?
yeah, I think again, it's an amazing question, and it's an area where parents just don't get a lot of help. There's no one to talk to, and I think one thing that I've learned is very difficult. So imagine this. I don't have my child, I'm having a son, right? But I imagine when I go to my son's first parents' evening at school and they tell me that he's doing really well and he's an amazing kid and he's full of energy and he's doing great at maths, that makes me feel great because that's my kid. And the same thing in gymnastics, right? In sport. So if you have all of these people that seem and they are influential figures in that sport saying to you, your kid could be the next Olympic champion, the next Olympic medalist. That is very hard as a parent not to buy into that. And that's a tough thing to navigate. And I think you can get sucked into this world. And gymnastics is a very unique sport, right? In that the reason it's different to most other sports is that the hours and the intensity is very extreme from a very, very early age. In other sports, it is the same, but maybe not until you're 14, 15, 16, especially if you're playing sports like baseball, maybe American football, athletics, soccer in the UK. Those sports get intense at the age of 14, 15, 16. But I was training 40 hours a week as a 9-year-old kid. That's like doing a full-time job. So my parents did the best they could with the information they had, and they tried to talk to other parents, but there really wasn't much help. Now, gymnastics back then as well, we're talking 25 years ago nearly, was a very different culture. It was very much the environment I grew up in was you as the parent, you stand outside, You don't come into the gym. You don't get a say in what's going on. And you trust that we know what's best for your children. That is very different now, but at that time, that's just how it was. So it was really interesting, even when the Me Too stuff came out in 2020. And I really do think that those athletes that came out and spoke about their experiences, I think for a lot of them, without the time to sit back and reflect of being out of the gym because of COVID, we still might not have got a lot of those conversations. And I was able to reflect back and talk to my parents. And I remember one time joking, saying, yeah, I got put in a box once, remember? And they were like, what do you mean? No, you didn't. I was like, yeah, I did. You guys all knew that, right? We just presumed all the parents knew about this. And when I was a young lad, it didn't cause me any harm. I thought it was hilarious because I was like, oh, this is great. And when I come out, all the other boys are going to think I'm cool because I've now been inside the box or whatever. But I understand that that's not okay. And that was a very different culture. But it showed me like, oh, I just presumed my parents were seeing everything that was happening, but they weren't, because it was at that time a very cut off environment. And whatever went on for 6 hours a day inside that gym, they would never know. And as long as I'm coming back and saying, yeah, everything's fine, which most kids, if you're doing that famous car journey from the gym back home and you ask your kid, how was your day? They're just going to, yeah, it was great. Yeah, it was fine. I don't want to talk about it. And you get that silence, that radio silence. And I think sometimes one of the best pieces of advice I could probably give a parent would be to, if you're having that situation, or maybe you've got an inkling that something's not okay, ask twice. So ask them if they're okay. They'll hit you back with a, yeah, I'm fine. And then wait a bit and then ask again. And then it might mellow out a bit. And then you might get to the bottom of it. But I think in terms of my parents, I have to say that my dad was my hero growing up. He worked harder than anybody I've ever come across. He still does. He works 7 days a week. He's an incredible guy. My mom is probably one of the most mentally tough people I've ever met, and I've met a lot of people. So I think that's where I get my mental toughness from. I'm just that kid in the gym that is just, I'm just going to outwork you. That's all I'm going to do. And I'll keep going. And as long as it takes, I was always that type of a kid when I was training. And that took me a very long way. But I do know now that I had a lot of natural gifts as well. I couldn't see them when I was younger, but now I look back and I go, oh wow, I was very talented. But my dad was that guy that was just there all of the time. He did anything that I ever needed. And he was a massive like supporter of mine. And my dad was brilliant because he understood very early on that there was not any money in this sport at that point. And in order for me to achieve my dream, he was going to have to generate some support because I have a younger brother and two younger sisters. And so financially, it was very difficult. In order for him to support my career, he was going to have to generate some kind of uh I guess almost recognition of what I was doing locally initially. So from the age of like 10 years old, I'd have the local press coming down to the gym every time I won a competition, which I absolutely hated. And I hated him for at the time. I now know what he was doing. And ultimately, yeah, my dad was a massive driving force in my career. My dad also, I think it's important to say, was a failed football player. So he played at a very high level and completely shattered his leg at the age of, I think he was 20, and he was very close to making a professional debut for Nottingham Forest, which is a big professional football club. All my family are on the men's side, on my dad's side, are from a football background, so we're all football players. So gymnastics was left field, and I played at a very high level playing football as well. So I do have that background. But I think the fact that my dad had to deal with the pain of dreaming of making it as a professional footballer and never quite getting there did influence the way in which he approached supporting me, because he never wanted me to feel that pain. So there were certain situations where he was maybe not necessarily hard on me, but expected incredibly high standards from me when I was just a kid, you know. But I would never change any of that because my dad instilled in me some of the morals and principles that I hope to instill in my son. But yeah, I mean, my dad was incredible in terms of, yeah, supporting my career. My mom was kind of good cop, dad was bad cop. And my dad tag teamed with my coach a lot. His name was Sergey Sejanov. He's one of the best men's coaches in the world, especially at a junior level. He's an incredible guy, but he was from that USSR Soviet system. So yeah, I think me, coupled with my dad being a failed footballer and my coach being a failed gymnast in terms of not reaching his potential in gymnastics, was probably slightly a recipe for a disaster. but yeah, but we still then went on to do amazing things. It just meant that there was a lot of hurdles for me to get over mentally, personally, once I got into my 20s.
I mean, the pressure, the intense pressure of you're not only carrying the weight of your dreams, you've got your dad's dreams and your coach's dreams
Yeah, and
on your shoulders.
I wouldn't say it was my dad's dreams. But for me, uh, I was never able as a kid to to understand that my family support or my friends support or sponsorship support was because they loved me. And for me, it was just more pressure. It was just piling up more pressure. It was all of my family are coming to watch me in this competition at the British Championships, and they've all took the day off work. They're paying for a hotel room. So I better win, because if I don't, they've wasted their weekend and they took a day off work. Rather than they're here because they love me and they just want to support me, and it doesn't matter if I make a mistake or not. I just wasn't able to do that. So at growing up, I always competed way better internationally because I didn't have my family with me. That pressure was gone. So I could forget about them, and it was one less thing for me to worry about. That's why, as a junior, I was one of the best in the world, because I'd go abroad, I'd feel relaxed, I'd just go and compete. Whereas if I was competing in Great Britain, I'd be embarrassed that 20 people from my family were there cheering and shouting for me. I'd be embarrassed that my dad had sorted out a local sponsor that were giving him a car, a company car, and a fuel card in order for me to be able to carry on doing gymnastics with my brothers and sisters. So I would get him to park a mile away from the arena so nobody else saw it, because I was embarrassed of it, because I didn't like the attention. I was embarrassed that he was putting me in front of a camera, because I just didn't get that. And as a kid, I just wanted to fit in. I wanted to be like everybody else, but I was living a very unique life. And as a teenager and as a young kid, these are just very complicated things that you don't understand at the time, and ultimately now I'm so grateful for those things, because my dad putting me in front of a camera at a very early age gave me such an advantage in life, because I'm an incredibly good communicator. And the biggest fear globally of anybody is the fear of public speaking. So what an advantage I have, because I can stand in front of 1,000 people, 10,000 people. I can talk to kids, I can talk to old people, any demographic, and I feel completely comfortable. So I now look at it as a major advantage, but as a child, I hated him for it.
I think any athletes out there who can relate to that embarrassment of people watching. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest things that impacts confidence, especially in young females. I know from a lot of talking with them, other people are such a distraction. Who's going to beat me? Who's watching me? Who's judging me? Who's looking at me? Who am I going to let down? Who am I going to fail? I mean, that freedom you talk about, you go international and you're like, oh, good, now I can just do gymnastics. Imagine if you could find that in practice, in local competitions, in international competitions. Imagine if you could just be free, perform. I mean, what do you think that would take? Is there any kind of insight that you can give to somebody who struggles with that particular issue? How do you let that go and find your freedom when there are 20 family members in the stands and there is that mean judge that scores low at the table?
Yeah, it's very difficult. And the amazing thing is that I got there at the end of my career. The last 2 years of my gymnastics career were probably the best 2 years of my gymnastics career, because I fell in love with the sport again, and I turned into that 7-year-old kid that walked into a gym club for the first time and was bright-eyed, couldn't believe what he was seeing. And it then became I was exploring again. It was, what am I capable of now? What can I do? Rather than being on, I have to do this, and if I don't do it, I failed. And now, how do you get somebody at the age of 13, 14, 15, 16 to that point? I don't know how you do that. I had to go on an incredible journey, a journey that led me, I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety at the age of 26. I became incredibly suicidal. I had to go through a lot to get to that point at the end of my career. And I don't think the majority of gymnasts and athletes never get there. And if they do get there, they get there after they've finished. Now, I feel very fortunate that I was able to figure that out before I even finished gymnastics and find peace at the end. Now, how do you get that? How do you get a young kid to understand that? I think it's very hard. I think it is probably focusing on, ultimately we're in a sport where you're going to be judged, and you are competing against other kids. So I think it's all about where the emphasis and the values are placed. That is really important. And I think the culture of the gymnastics club that you're in probably sets that. I get asked a lot now, are you going to let your kids do gymnastics? That was a question that we would throw around all the time. When I was 14, 15, we'd all say, if you have kids, would you let them do gym? And everyone would say no. Everyone would say, it's interesting. Everybody would say, if I had a girl, not a chance. They'll never do gymnastics. If I had a boy, maybe, because it will toughen them up. Why it's different, I'm not sure. But now I think for me, the most important thing is make sure that you vet the club that you're taking them to and the coaches, and talk to the other parents. What's the culture like? Do you see the kids smiling? Are they having a good time? What is the difference between them working really hard and the culture being quite a negative? There is a difference. You know, there is a line. You can figure that out. You know what's right and wrong. Trust your common sense. But I think going back and trying to get through to a kid, how do they just focus on themselves and what they're doing and nobody else? I think it comes down to those values and really the messaging and making sure that they understand from a very early age, you can only control what you are doing. And we're going to focus on making sure you're trying to improve yourself from week to week, month to month, year to year, and your results, rather than focusing on beating this person and this medal and this, because that's such a hard thing to do. So I think as parents, one of the best things you can do is those conversations you're having around competitions and training is never bringing up competitors and medals and competition and this one. If they want to talk about it, they will come to you 100%. If they're struggling or they're stressed about that, they'll tell you. You don't need to squeeze that out of them, okay? Because whatever you're thinking in your head, they're thinking about it in their head because they're dealing with it every single day. So I think that's really important. But yeah, it's very difficult. One of the things that I did, we spoke, very briefly before I came on, I set up a mentoring program. And it was initially the idea would be that I would work with 17 to 18-year-old men that were on the fringe of making the Great Britain team. And I would be the little bit at the end that would help them take that step. What actually happened was the first group I worked with was a group of girls from the age of 8 to 12 that weren't doing necessarily elite gymnastics. They just loved it. And I was like, okay, this is the complete opposite demographic that I was aiming for. But all of those things we worked on were completely transferable. And what we focused on in that was building their self-confidence through their super strengths. So what are you really good at? What is the unique thing you're bringing to the table? And the amazing way I start those sessions is I get the other girls in the group to tell me the strengths of that girl. And then she's like, oh, wow, I didn't know I was good at that. It makes her feel good. And then I ask them to tell me their super strengths. And it's really great because they start working together. They start to understand and identify that, oh, this girl in my group here, she's really good at being brave when someone needs to try a new skill for the first time. That's a really important quality to have as an athlete. But I'm better over here being the person that gets everybody going when everyone's feeling down, and I can bring the atmosphere up when I'm a good team player. This girl over here is the workhorse of the group. She's just really, she could just do the numbers and do the reps. So it's getting them to understand that everybody has different strengths and weaknesses. That's okay. And physically and mentally as well. So it's working on that, overcoming obstacles, finding motivation, setting goals. The importance of setting goals, I think, is a big one. And it's a way to manage expectations probably when you're a kid. The biggest mistake I ever made at the age of, let's say, 12 was going, right, I'm going to be the Olympic champion. Because from that point on, whatever I did was never going to be as high as that. So at 12 years old, I win the British Championships. It's not, I won the British Championships, that's amazing. It's not the European Championships. I go win the European Championships. It's not, I'm now the European champion. It's not the World Championships. And that just keeps going and going and going and going. So I think having dreams and goals, they're two separate things. A dream to me is a very positive thing. So a dream is a dream of one day, I hope, my dream is to go to the Olympic Games. That's an amazing positive thing. But goal setting and expectations are very separate to that. And I think making sure that you're setting short-term goals within a year is very important, because you need that evidence that you're doing well as well. When you're a kid, you need to know that, okay, I'm progressing, I'm getting better. But separating the two for me is really important. You know, if at 12 years old I'd have gone, right, my dream is to go to the Olympic Games, and that's amazing, and like I really want to do that, but I understand that's going to be very difficult. My next goal and my next stepping stone on the way to that is competing well at the British Championships in 4 weeks' time. And actually, if I go there and I improve from last year, that's a massive step forward. That is a much healthier way to look at progress, I think, when you're a kid and you're growing up. Hopefully that kind of answers your question a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and I would even take it a step smaller and go, you improve from today to the end of practice, because
Yeah.
there's times where you did great yesterday, you show up today and you're not hitting, you didn't sleep as well, you didn't eat right, you're in a bad mood, coach is grumpy, teammates are being rude, and you're just not doing what you did yesterday. So if you can go, okay, well, what can I do right now?
Yeah.
And then how can I make the next turn a little bit better? And the next turn a little bit better. That's where, that black and white thinking that allows you to kind of step into the gray of all of it.
And I would take, and it's really interesting that you say that. One thing that I find with that is that the situation then arises. If you try and get better every single day, the gymnast will then look at their whole session as a whole and go, was it a better session than yesterday? It wasn't. Okay, I failed. So what I do when I work with athletes now is I say, you just need to make sure that your Monday of this week was slightly better than Monday from last week. Then Tuesday, you make Tuesday slightly better from Tuesday last week. And if you do that over a long enough period, before you know it, in 6 months' time, you've come a massive long way. Because the only thing you need to do on Monday this week to make last Monday better is just one part of your training session needs to be better on one apparatus, on one skill, and that's an improvement. So if you can do that every single day over a long period of time, you've now got a body of work where you've made massive improvements, and along the way you haven't beaten yourself up for not being better every single day. Does that make sense? And I think if I had learned that from a young age, that would have been so helpful. And I started to incorporate that into my thinking approaching training towards the end of my career, and it was huge for me, because rather than trying to be better at every little single thing I did, all I needed to do was to be slightly better on one thing, and that was really manageable and quite easy to do. And then it made me feel, when I left the training session, oh wow, yeah, that was a positive session. You know what? Compared to last week, that was a big improvement. That's great. Oh, amazing. I'm going in the right direction, rather than that was a really terrible session. What am I going to do tomorrow? Now there's a lot of pressure on me to have an even better session tomorrow. And I think, like you said, there are so many things when you're a kid growing up, especially for parents watching, like sleep, things that are happening at school, homework, whatever it might be, that massively, hormones changing, growth spurts, all of these things are going to completely throw off gymnastics. And if gymnastics is a sole focus of your life when you're that kid, that can be very destabilizing. And so I think it's very important for me. You know, we've just had some new legislation that's been passed by British Gymnastics in Great Britain, which is something that I spoke about 3 years ago, that I don't believe that any kids under the age of 16 should be taken out of school. And it's not even because I think they should be educating. It's actually the social side of things. And they need to have more elements to them than just being a gymnast. They need to be a gymnast and a good friend and have schoolwork as well. And the longer you can prolong them just having gymnastics, the better, in my opinion. So I think as a parent, you need to make sure that, okay, let's say we've got a child that's doing 30 hours of gymnastics a week, and then we've got other children over here that are doing, let's say, other sports, but maybe not for 30 hours. Maybe they're doing 2 hours of football or whatever it is. We need to be very careful in the way that we manage this, so they know that they're no more important than our kids here. And you do something that's very unique, and we're going to support you with that. But actually, let's emphasize family time as much as we possibly can. And that's a difficult balance to strike when you've got one kid over here that's doing 30 hours a week, and they're going away and they're missing school at 8 or 9 years old and going on training camp. That's tough to do. But I think it's really important, not just for the whole family, but for the development of that child in that situation, because, you know, it ultimately is a very unique life they're going to live. And the chances are the statistics show that they're not going to make it. So let's prepare for them not making it, but being a very well-rounded individual by the time they get to the age of 18, rather than all of our eggs in this one basket. And then at 18, they don't make it. And now I just can't handle life, you know?
Do you think that that well-rounded aspect, is that what was different for you when you were 23 that allowed you to have a little more fun, a little more joy, is that you knew you were more than a
So even
gymnast?
probably not at 23, if I'm completely honest. So at that time, at 23, I was still fully tunnel vision to the point at which, you know, I sacrificed a relationship at that point for this. Even again, I hadn't, the amount of times I had to make a mistake before I learned this lesson. I mean, we're talking up until the age of 26, I was still doing this. And it took me reaching rock bottom to understand that, right, the way I'm doing this is not working. I've got to change something, you know? And I remember having a conversation with my coach and saying, Sergey, look, you know, I'm so unhappy. I can't remember being happy. And I'm not telling you this to upset you, but it's important. Like, and he said, look, and he was crying when we were having this conversation. He never cries. He was born in Russia. You know, he's made of strong stuff. And he cried one of only two times I've seen him cry. And he said, look, you need to tell me so I don't make this mistake again. And it's none of this was his fault. He grew up in a world where he used to have to fight other kids to get the potatoes that used to fall off the trucks where he lived. So you can imagine what it was like going to the National Training Center. It was cutthroat. I've got to try and make this to get out of poverty. So that it's to expect him to come into a Western culture and then just fit in normally. That's crazy, right? But he understood that. And at that point, I realized, but it took me time and time again to figure out, okay, it's not the world I need to change. I've got to change my approach. This system that exists everywhere in every facet of life. Life is just a people game. Whether you're talking about my partner, my fiance, she works in a school, right? It's just people. And I see the same people in gymnastics I see working in schools as I see working in construction, working in finance. That's all it is. And all these systems exist everywhere. So you have to figure that out. And I had to figure out, right, I need to change my approach because the world around me isn't going to change. I'm viewing this through the wrong set of lenses. I've got to really pivot and try and do something different. That was very hard because for me, the easy thing at that point in my life was to just do what I knew and to stick to the same routine. The brave thing was to go, right, me being all in 100%, completely intense, the most professional athlete you would ever come across, trying every single different recovery strategy I could possibly do to try and get my career back on track isn't working. I need to now go completely left field and start. If I turn up to the gym and my shoulder's hurting, go, I'm going home, I can't train today. That for me was so alien. To force myself to do that was so tough. But in the end, I was like, wow, if I'd have been able to do this when I was younger, my career would have lasted for so much longer and I would have had a good senior career rather than just an incredible junior career. I always say to athletes now, you should aim for a long, consistent senior career, not an incredible junior career, because you'll just burn out like that. And I was essentially, you know, without being arrogant, for my age, at one point in time, I was the best in the world for my age. But then I never really fulfilled my potential after that because I spent the rest of my career injured, you know. So yeah, yes, it's a difficult one, but I'm quite happy to unpick and pull apart my whole career so people can take the learnings and the values from it and the lessons. And I say that I still had an amazing career, you know. I went to the Olympic Games at 19. I was the youngest member of the team, won an Olympic medal. I was a youth Olympic champion and silver medalist. I was the first British man ever to qualify for a high bar final, then to win a high bar medal at a major championship. I did that 3 years back to back. Yeah, these things that, you know, as a kid, I had no business dreaming of doing, and I went on to do them. And I think, yeah, you know, when I was younger, I used to think my experiences, my opinion isn't valid because I wasn't the very best. But now in life, I understand that the people that struggled the hardest are the people you can learn from the most. And for me, that's why I'm now trying to share my experiences with people. Yeah, just because Yeah, I like talking. Obviously, you can tell I'm not giving you any room to jump in, but also I think it's really important because that just wasn't there when I was a kid. There was nobody doing what you're doing and speaking to parents. My parents had nobody to turn to. You know, they had no point of reference. And as a gymnast, I had no gymnast that I could listen to that might be able to help me avoid making some of the mistakes that I made, you know?
Hmm. A- Amazing. I mean, I can just listen to you all day. I mean, I think it's beautiful that our like I'm a cautionary tale in my space. I quit because I was too scared. And now my job is to help kids with fear. And you are the guy who pushed too hard, burned yourself out, got didn't get to fulfill this, long career because of that. So you can now say, "Hey kid, if it hurts, tell somebody,
Yeah,
take a day off," and I still see kids even in 12 years later. It's a little bit more acceptable to be in pain and modify something, thank God.
mm,
But they still come to me, our group trainings, and they go, my arm kind of hurts and I don't know what to do. I'm like, have you told anyone? No. Well,
mm,
that would be a very good first step to tell somebody. And
yeah,
they're just so afraid. If I tell somebody, then I can't compete. And if I can't compete, I can't have my dream. And if I can't have my dream, then what's the point of all of this hard work? And that's literally the train of thought. And for you to be able to go, actually, the joy that I found was after the Olympics. It was
yeah,
in kind of showing up to practice curious instead of under the gun of these expectations, showing up and going, well, what's possible today? Let's go see. Let's
yeah,
listen to my body. Let's communicate. And just imagine if at age 12 you showed up communicating, listening to your body, trusting yourself, curious what's possible, and then just having this fun, sparkly dream kind of out in the future that you're working toward, but you're not, killing yourself over. I
yeah.
just I just wonder, how much happier could you have been as a young adult if that were the
Yeah, and I
case?
think, look, like I said, I was probably always going to go down that pathway, even if it wasn't gymnastics was the vehicle, but it could have been something else, and it would have been a different sport probably, and I still would have ended up in that place. I'm actually grateful that I ended up in that place at 26 because, I imagine I had a midlife crisis at 26 rather than 50. So I'm probably going to avoid getting a yellow sports car now, which is great. For me, going to that place where I got to, it actually was like it's like my superpower because I just feel I've got a second chance. And I don't want anybody else to have to get to that point to do that. But for me, I had to. I think it's important to point out as well to your listeners that in some respects, my situation was very unique in that I left school in year 9 in Great Britain, which would be 14, I left home and lived with another family. So I wasn't even with my family at that point. I've also now, as an adult, just this year, been diagnosed with childhood ADHD and obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So you can imagine mixing those two things with gymnastics, which is a sport where it's impossible to be perfect, was probably a recipe for disaster, but also probably why I got so good. That's why I say there's always two sides of a coin to everything, if it's used in the right way and you understand it, it can be a massive benefit. But if it's used in the wrong way, can become incredibly detrimental. So I think it's important to point that out. But a lot of the things that I experienced and went through, they're translatable for everybody in any walk of life. Yeah, and the fear thing's really interesting what you talked about. I did 8 months of coaching at the gymnastics club that I grew up in last year. And I would work with 10 different groups of kids a week. So everything from 4-year-olds just doing recreational gymnastics to people training for the Olympic Games or World Championships to disability. And my favorite group was a group of 7 and 8-year-old girls. Uh, and I'd never, when I was a kid, imagined that I would enjoy coaching women's gymnastics. But it was a group of 7 or 8-year-old girls. And I spend most of my time just talking to them about why they fell out with their friends at school. And it was brilliant. I loved it. And I'd get told off for not actually coaching them. But one thing that was really interesting that you brought up the fear concept. And I think one thing that people really struggle with, maybe parents as well, particularly coaches, and even the public, given what happened with Simone Biles in Tokyo at the Olympic Games, was when she had a mental block So I noticed that there was a little girl. She was amazing. She was so cool, and she was really talented. Her name was Darcy. She was a brilliant little gymnast, and she was really scared of doing a flick on the high beam. So she was really scared. And I developed this theory that what happens is when you get to a point where a skill becomes quite easy for you, you tend to stop thinking about the process that you go through when you do it. So her mind was blank. So rather than thinking about, right, to do this flick on the beam, I need to push with my legs, I need to swing my arms back, I need to see my hands, I need to drive my legs down to stand up. Let's say they were the four key things she needed to think about. Her mind was just empty, she was just thinking of, what if I hurt myself? What if I fall? I'm scared of doing this flick. What if something goes wrong? And I started to kind of notice this. I developed a theory where I was like, right, you've just got too much free thinking time. Let's break this down to the four things you need to focus on to perform that skill well. First of all, I want you to say them out loud. So let's acknowledge what they are. Let's say it was the flick on beam. I think the things that she told me, I think she said strong legs, arm swing, cedar beam, strong stand up, something like that. And so we simplified those to four words, and I got her to say them out loud. Then I got her to say them out loud in a sequence. Then I got her to say them out loud while she visualized herself doing the skill. Then I got her to say them out loud while I supported her for the skill on the floor beam. Then I got her to say it inside her head while I supported her on the floor beam. And eventually she did it, and it seemed to work. But as I was going through this process, I was like, right, if I'm going to try and get this young girl to try this and she's scared, I need to apply it to myself. So I went back onto the high bar and tried to relearn the skill that caused me the most fear in my career and apply this theory. And it worked to an extent. I was so scared of this skill that even after I'd retire, I'd walk around and sometimes think about it and I get sweaty palms because it freaked me out so much. And I went back right to the building blocks and worked out, okay, how would I break this down? What do I need to think of? And I think for me, it was basically doing a straight catch ever on the high bar with a full twist, which is called a Lukin, named after Nasty Lukin's father. So I was like, right, I need to think about my chest in, I need to push away, I need to kick up, I need to drive my chin down, I need to block and pull my heels, which is a lot to say in a short space of time. But what was happening was I did so many of those skills throughout my career, literally hundreds of thousands, that I had so much thinking time when I was doing the giant to do this. All I was thinking was, what if I twist early? What if I slip off? And then I started going, okay, chest, push, kick, chin, heels, drive. And I started to practice this, visualize it, do the action for the skill without letting go, then do it without the twist. And it worked. And I caught the skill. So I was like, okay, this kind of works. And I think it's something I want to explore more with my coaching, with other kids that have mental blocks as well. Because I think a lot of it is, free time inside their head to worry about what's going on. And let's take that back to the scratch. But yeah, I'd love to know what you think to that. Obviously working on fear with kids that get mental blocks, but yeah, it might be an interesting thing for parents that their kids saying, I've got a twisting problem, or I've got this block, I can't do it. And as a parent, you're like, what? Why don't you just do it? But if you've never thrown yourself backwards to do a back somersault before, you might never understand that fear,
Yeah. Yes, I love the way you explain it because it links directly in with how I describe it. And I also interviewed Dave Diggle, who works with the Australian national team,
Okay.
similar. And so the way he does it is he draws out every single moment of that skill, because what happens is that the brain will sort of remove sections and replace it with emotions.
Right.
And
That's
so
very
you'll
interesting.
have that one critical moment where what if, and the feelings come in, it feels off, it feels weird, it feels different. Whereas the feeling has no place. It's just technique and execution. But it's always these skills that you can do perfectly. It's the one I won beam with was the one I couldn't do. It always is. If she can tumble, she's the best tumbler in the whole gym, but she can't get herself to go.
Yeah.
And so you nailed it with, yeah, you figure out the technique, you plug those mental holes, and you start at the beginning.
Right.
And
Wow.
you start where it feels safe, where the brain will give you the green light. Because if the brain is giving you a red light and the coach goes, well, stay on that beam until you figure it out in an hour, and you're just failing and failing and failing, it's killing your confidence. So you support them, you talk with them, you ask them questions, you take them to the low beam, you let them take those moments of baby steps. You let the brain go, oh, that's right. Oh yeah, okay, I can do this. Oh, this is safe. And you're rewiring that fear mechanism that's putting on the brakes.
Mm.
So I mean, and it's a long process. This isn't one practice, right?
Yeah.
That you get the
Yeah.
kid back. I think that's the misconception is they go, well, you did it yesterday or you did it last month, so we should be able to do two here, two here, two here, and you're good,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a longer process that requires some patience and a lot of collaboration and communication with coaches. I mean, in gyms where coaches collaborate with athletes, just like you, they get creative. They go, okay, if this didn't work, what can we try? If that didn't work, what can we try? What should we try next? And they go to plan 28, 29, 30, 34, and they don't give up and they don't go, well, the kid's broken. I don't know. I can't help you. I've tried everything. They
Yeah.
go, okay, there's got to be a way. And then something works. And then the kid knows they're not broken. The coach knows they're not broken. It's just a matter of repetition often and getting the right thoughts in place. So I love that example. And I think a lot of families out there will go, oh, wow, that makes so much sense. I'm going to try it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting
Amazing.
you said about that Australian coach there. One thing that I noticed probably around the age of about 12, it's probably about 23, 24. There was a skill that I'd compete on high bar. I was trying to compete. It was called a casino. So it was straight Kovacs with full twist. And I noticed that because I would always I'd be visualizing things all the time. But whenever I got to that skill, I would stop and leave it because it gave me a lot of anxiety and fear. So I wouldn't visualize that skill. I can remember thinking, why don't I like to visualize that skill? It's because it was giving me that emotion. Rather than thinking of the process of what I needed to do, I was
Mhm.
I was letting that emotion sink in. So it's really interesting that you said that. Just made me think of that example straight away.
Yeah. Well, and I tell kids often your imagery will give you a clue of what's not working. You know, a girl was stuck on a giant and she could see the whole thing and then she couldn't see the handstand. Couldn't see the handstand. So I go, okay, that's the drill. That's the part you drill is up into it and through. That's the part you drill. And once you've got that back in order, once you've done the Dave Diggle and you've drawn out every little moment of that handstand position, then you can visualize it again. And so I
Yeah.
have kids actually visualize in slow motion. So
Right.
if the
Okay.
part they get stuck, we stop, we back it up to where they've got it correct, and they go slowly through, and then they speed it up. And with time, just like any skill, you do a drill, you get better, you add on, you improve. Your brain is almost giving you that green light again, and then you can do it physically and mentally. It's really cool. Mental
Yeah.
stuff is just so amazing in this
It
sport.
is amazing. Yeah, it is. And it certainly is the way. I mean, there are so many times, like I think it's the phrase sleep on a problem exists in nearly every single language in the world. And
Mm.
there are so many times where I would struggle with a skill, go home, sleep, come back the next day, do it straight away. And I say that to kids quite a lot. If we get to the point where they're really sure, I say, leave it. You'll probably come back tomorrow and it'll be fine. You'll get it straight away. This isn't wasted work. You're putting the reps in. Your brain's going to work on it while you're sleeping tonight, and we'll
Yes.
get it tomorrow. And some people think this guy's talking like he's Master Yoda, but like there's a lot of evidence to suggest that that works, right? So yeah,
Absolutely.
visualization and I think I mean the biggest advice I could give any parents is making sure that your kids are sleeping as much as they possibly can when they're growing up. Just not even for gymnastics and sport, but just for in general, like it's huge, you know.
I tell everyone the lowest hanging fruit, if your kid's struggling with fear, is get more sleep.
Yeah.
Get more sleep and fix your food and pretty much and well, okay, get out of abusive coaching situations and mom leave them alone or leave her alone. Stop asking so many questions.
Yeah.
Then you probably won't need me. If you still need me after that, then that's fine. But I mean, you knock out all those and it really will set a kid up for success.
100%. Yeah.
Well, Sam, this has been amazing. I have really enjoyed our conversation. I think that you've got such an amazing perspective. I think coaches, parents, and kids can all learn so much. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
You are very welcome. Thank you for having me.